lived in.
Celebrity chef
This is
Thomas
how we get
Laurent
that
stood in the
perfect
shadows of the
dice.
walk-in cooler at 3 in the morning, watching through the small window as his newest line cook, 22-year-old Jasmine Walker, worked alone in the silent kitchen with a precision and artistry that didn't match her resume of community college dropout and diner experience. Her hands moving across a prime cut of beef with the confident strokes of someone who understood meat at a molecular level, breaking down the muscle structure with cuts so perfect they looked like anatomical illustrations. And Thomas felt his carefully constructed plan to find authentic, undiscovered talent for his new reality show crumbling because this young black woman working the graveyard prep shift for minimum wage wasn't just competent. She was extraordinary, and he needed to understand why someone with this level of skill was hidden in his kitchen's overnight shift instead of running her own restaurant, or at least working in one of the prestigious kitchens that would kill to have someone with her obvious training. Thomas had come to his own restaurant disguised as a health inspector doing a surprise overnight audit, wearing a fake mustache that felt ridiculous and a clipboard that gave him authority to be anywhere, because his producers wanted genuine reactions from undiscovered culinary talent, wanted him to find the next big chef working in obscurity, and his team had identified Jasmine through social media posts from other kitchen workers who'd mentioned her almost supernatural ability to salvage any dish and her mysterious habit of practicing elaborate techniques during her breaks. But watching her now, Thomas realized this wasn't someone who needed discovering. This was someone who was deliberately hiding, and that mystery was far more interesting than any reality show premise. He pushed through the kitchen door, his fake health inspector persona in place, and Jasmine looked up from her work, no fear or surprise in her eyes, just a calm assessment that made Thomas feel like she was the one evaluating him. And she said in a voice that carried quiet authority, "The health inspection was last week, the real one. And you're holding that clipboard like you've never actually filled out a violation report. So either you're terrible at your job, or you're not actually a health inspector. Which is it?" Thomas felt his cover dissolving under her direct gaze, and he made a split-second decision to abandon the charade, because this young woman clearly deserved honesty more than manipulation. So he pulled off the ridiculous mustache and said, "You're right, I'm not a health inspector. I'm Thomas Laurent. I own this restaurant, and I'm here because I heard you have extraordinary skills that don't match your position, and I wanted to see for myself." Jasmine's expression didn't change. She simply returned to her work, her knife moving with that same hypnotic precision, and she said without looking up, "So, you came to spy on your own employee at 3 in the morning, instead of just asking me directly. That says a lot about you, Mr. Laurent. None of it particularly impressive." Thomas felt properly chastised, realizing that his innovative approach to finding talent was actually just invasive and disrespectful, and he pulled up a stool and sat across the prep station from her, watching those skilled hands work. "You're right. I apologize. That was wrong. But I'm here now, and I'm genuinely curious. Where did you learn to butcher like that? Those are cuts I learned at Le Cordon Bleu, techniques that take years to master. Yet your resume says you dropped out of community college and worked at a diner. That doesn't add up." Jasmine paused, her knife hovering over the meat, and when she looked up, Thomas saw something in her eyes that was equal parts pain and fierce pride, and she said, "My resume tells you what I want employers to know, not my whole story. There's a difference." Thomas leaned forward, his curiosity now completely genuine, divorced from any reality show premise. "I'd like to know your whole story, if you're willing to share it." Jasmine studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he was worth the vulnerability, and then she set down her knife and said, "I'll make you a deal. I'll tell you my story, but you have to work beside me while I do. If you really want to understand who I am, you need to see how I cook, because my cooking is my story. They're inseparable." Thomas agreed immediately, pulling on an apron and taking the station beside her. And as they worked together breaking down proteins and preparing components for the next day's service, Jasmine began to talk, her hands never stopping their precise movements. And Thomas learned that she'd grown up in the kitchen of her grandmother's soul food restaurant on the South Side, a place that had been a community institution for 40 years, serving food that wasn't just sustenance, but love made edible. And her grandmother, Big Mama Rose, had taught Jasmine everything about cooking with soul and purpose, about understanding ingredients, not just technically, but spiritually, about how food could heal and connect and transform. And by the time Jasmine was 16, she was running the kitchen on weekends, creating dishes that honored tradition while pushing boundaries. And she'd earned a full scholarship to the Culinary Institute, her ticket out, her chance to become something beyond her neighborhood's limitations. Big Mama was so proud, Jasmine said, her voice catching slightly as she portioned vegetables with mechanical precision. She threw a party at the restaurant, invited everyone from the neighborhood, told them all that her grandbaby was going to be a famous chef, that I was going to show the world what real cooking looked like, and I believed her. I was 18 and full of dreams and certainty that I'd conquer the culinary world, return home triumphant, maybe open my own place, make Big Mama proud. Thomas heard the shift in her tone. The way past tense crept in, and he asked gently, "What happened?" Jasmine's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work, and she said, 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for culinary school, Big Mama had a stroke, massive one, left her partially paralyzed, unable to run the restaurant, and suddenly I had a choice, pursue my dreams or save her legacy. And when you frame it like that, it's not really a choice at all, is it? Thomas felt his throat tighten because he understood the weight of that impossible decision, the sacrifice it represented, and he asked, "So you stayed? Gave up the scholarship, took over the restaurant?" Jasmine nodded, her knife work never faltering even as she spoke about the hardest period of her life. "I stayed. I ran that restaurant for 4 years. 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Trying to maintain Big Mama's standards, while also keeping the business afloat in a neighborhood that was gentrifying, where rents were rising and our longtime customers were being displaced. I learned more about cooking and business and survival in those 4 years than any culinary school could have taught me. But I also watched the restaurant slowly die, despite everything I did, because the economics just didn't work. The new residents wanted artisanal coffee shops and farm-tooped bistros, not soul food from a 40-year-old restaurant with worn booths and no Instagram aesthetic." She paused to taste a sauce she was preparing, adjusted the seasoning with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, and continued, "Big Mama passed 2 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep, and her last words to me were, 'Baby girl, you gave me the gift of seeing my legacy continue. Now you go live your own life. Promise me.' And I promised, but by then I was 20. No scholarship, no formal training, just experience that didn't translate to the kind of credentials fancy restaurants wanted. So I enrolled in community college, figured I'd get a business degree, maybe find a way back to cooking eventually. But then my little brother got sick, needed medicine our insurance didn't cover, and I had to make another choice." Thomas stopped his prep work entirely, giving Jasmine his full attention, and she met his eyes with a directness that was almost challenging. "I dropped out, took this job and 2 others, worked every hour I could to pay for his treatments. And he's healthy now, thriving actually, starting college this fall on an academic scholarship because I made sure he could focus on school instead of working. Made sure he wouldn't face the same choices I did, and I'd make the same decision again, every time. But it means my culinary career is here. Overnight prep cook, using skills I taught myself and learned from Big Mama in a kitchen where nobody knows and nobody cares, as long as the prep is done by morning service." The kitchen was silent except for the sound of knives on cutting boards and the gentle bubbling of stalks on the stove, and Thomas felt ashamed of his reality show premise, his search for undiscovered talent that treated people's lives as content. Because Jasmine wasn't undiscovered, she'd been making impossible choices and sacrificing her dreams for family, and her talent was the least interesting thing about her compared to her character and resilience. "Why do you practice these techniques?" Thomas asked, gesturing to the precise French cuts she was executing on vegetables. "If nobody sees, if it doesn't advance your career, why maintain these skills?" Jasmine's smile was sad but determined, because Big Mama taught me that excellence is a habit, not a performance. You cook with integrity when nobody's watching, because that's when it matters most, when it's just you and the food and the standards you set for yourself. I practice because I refuse to let circumstances steal my skills, even if I can't use them professionally right now. They're mine, they're what I have left of my dreams, and I won't let them atrophy just because life didn't go according to plan. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a realization that was both humbling and energizing, and he said, "Jasmine, I came here tonight with a stupid reality show idea, looking for talent to exploit for entertainment. But what I found instead is someone who embodies everything I claim to value, but have lost touch with in my own success. You cook with purpose and integrity. You sacrifice for family. You maintain excellence even in obscurity. You're everything I wish I still was, before fame and recognition made me forget why I started cooking in the first place." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Is this leading somewhere, or are you just having an existential crisis in my prep kitchen?" Thomas laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months, and he made a decision that would either be brilliant or destroy his carefully constructed plans. "I want to offer you the executive sous chef position at my new restaurant, the one opening downtown next month. Full salary, benefits, creative input, a platform to showcase your skills. But more than that, I want you to teach me, remind me what cooking with soul looks like, because I've been so focused on Michelin stars and Instagram followers that I forgot. Food is supposed to mean something beyond aesthetics and accolades." Jasmine set down her knife and looked at him with an expression that was equal parts skepticism and hope, and she said, "Why would you offer that to someone with no formal credentials, no fancy restaurant experience? Someone who's been working overnight prep for minimum wage?" Thomas met her gaze directly, "Because in 2 hours of watching you work and hearing your story, you've demonstrated more culinary integrity and understanding of what food should be than most of the formally trained chefs I've worked with. Because you learned from your grandmother, who learned from lived experience and cultural tradition, and that knowledge is worth more than any diploma. Because you've maintained excellence through circumstances that would have broken most people, and that resilience will make you better in a high-pressure kitchen than someone who's only cooked in controlled environments. But mostly because I think Big Mama Rosa's legacy deserves to continue, and you deserve the chance to honor her while building your own path, and I can provide that chance if you're willing to trust me." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, the first crack in her composed exterior, and she said, "I have conditions. My brother is in college. I need flexibility to help him when needed. I need health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions because of his medical history, and I need your word that this isn't charity or some diversity initiative to make your restaurant look good. I need to know you're hiring me because of my skills, not despite my circumstances." Thomas extended his hand across the prep station. "You have my word. I'm hiring you because you're the best cook I've seen in years, because your understanding of food goes beyond technique to purpose, and because I need someone who'll call me out when I'm being ridiculous, like you did tonight. Those are the conditions. Take them or leave them." Jasmine shook his hand, her grip firm and sure, and she said, "I accept, but I finish this prep shift first, because abandoning work half done isn't how Big Mama raised me." Thomas grinned and picked up his knife. Then I'll help. Show me how you want these vegetables cut, chef. The next months transformed both of them in unexpected ways. Thomas discovered that Jasmine's approach to cooking, rooted in her grandmother's soul food traditions, brought a depth and authenticity to his new restaurant's concept that his formal training had never achieved. She taught him to taste not just for balance but for emotion, to consider not just how a dish looked but what it communicated, to remember that people ate food not just for sustenance but for connection, comfort, memory. And under her influence the menu evolved from technically impressive but emotionally distant plates to dishes that made people cry, because they tasted like home, like love, like someone cared enough to cook with their whole heart. Jasmine thrived in the professional environment. Her skills finally matched with resources and recognition, but more importantly, she found a way to honor Big Mama's legacy while building her own identity. She created a special section of the menu called Rose's Kitchen, featuring elevated versions of her grandmother's recipes, and 50% of the profits from those dishes funded culinary scholarships for students from underserved communities, ensuring that other talented young people wouldn't face the same impossible choices she had. The restaurant opened to immediate acclaim, critics praising the unique fusion of classical technique and soul food tradition. But the real success was measured in the customers who returned weekly, who brought their families, who told their friends about the food that tasted like someone actually cared. And Thomas credited Jasmine in every interview, insisted she'll be recognized as co-executive chef, despite her initial protests, because he understood that her story and her skills were inseparable, and both deserved celebration. 6 months after opening, Thomas and Jasmine stood in the kitchen after a particularly grueling service, exhausted but satisfied, and Thomas said, "I need to tell you something. The night I came to spy on you, I was planning a reality show. I was going to discover you on camera, make it this whole dramatic reveal, use your story for content, and I'm ashamed of that now. Ashamed that I almost treated your life as entertainment. I wanted you to know that I abandoned that idea completely. What we built here is real, not performed for cameras. And I'm grateful you gave me the chance to do something meaningful instead of something exploitative." Jasmine smiled, wiping down her station with the same care she brought to everything. And she said, "I knew about the reality show. One of the other cooks told me you were scouting the staff, looking for a storyline. That's why I wasn't surprised when you showed up playing health inspector. I was testing you right back, seeing if you'd be honest when confronted, seeing if you valued people over content, and you passed, barely, but you passed." Thomas laughed, shaking his head. "So we were both testing each other, both looking for authenticity in a world full of performance. What does that say about us?" Jasmine considered this. "It says we're both products of industries that commodify passion, that turn cooking into content and credentials into currency. But we're trying to push back against that, trying to remember that food is fundamentally about nourishing people, body and soul, and that's revolutionary in its simplicity." She paused, then added, "Big Mama used to say that the best cooking happens when you stop performing and start serving. When you forget about impressing people and focus on feeding them, not just their stomachs, but their hearts. You've helped me get back to that, Thomas. Helped me remember that my grandmother's lessons were worth more than any culinary degree, and I've helped you remember why you started cooking before the fame and pressure made it complicated. So maybe we both discovered each other. Maybe that's the real story." Thomas felt tears in his eyes because she was right. They'd saved each other from different kinds of obscurity. Jasmine from the invisibility of overnight prep work that didn't recognize her gifts. Thomas from the hollow visibility of celebrity that had disconnected him from purpose. And together they'd built something that honored both. Big Mama's legacy and the fundamental truth that good food required not just skill, but soul. Not just technique, but heart. Not just ingredients, but intention. And that combination was rarer and more valuable than any Michelin star. Years later, when culinary students would ask Jasmine about her unconventional path to success, about skipping formal training and working her way up from overnight prep, she'd tell them about Big Mama Rose, about the impossible choices and the years of sacrifice, about maintaining excellence even when nobody was watching, and about the night a celebrity chef tried to spy on her and ended up learning more than he taught. And she'd emphasize that there are many paths to mastery, some through prestigious schools and traditional apprenticeships, others through family kitchens and hard-earned experience, and none are more valid than others as long as they're walked with integrity, with commitment to growth, with respect for those who taught you, and with understanding that cooking is ultimately about service, about using your skills to nourish and connect and comfort, because that's what transforms technique into art. What makes food matter beyond its consumption? What creates meals that people remember not for their plating or their Instagram potential, but for how they made them feel, for the care evident in every bite, for the story they told about where they came from and who prepared them? Thomas would eventually write a book about his experience. Not a celebrity chef cookbook, but a meditation on rediscovering purpose and the dedication read to Jasmine, who reminded me that the best cooking happens at 3 a.m. when nobody's watching, when it's just you and the food and the standards you set for yourself. Thank you for teaching me that excellence is a habit, not a performance, and that the most valuable culinary education comes from those who cook with their whole hearts. Regardless of their credentials, Big Mama Rose raised an extraordinary chef and an even more extraordinary human. Her legacy lives on in every dish you create and every person you inspire. Jasmine framed that dedication and hung it in her own restaurant, which she opened 5 years after joining Thomas, a place that honored Big Mama's memory while serving her community, where formerly incarcerated individuals and young people from underserved neighborhoods could apprentice and learn not just cooking skills, but business management and financial literacy, where excellent food was accessible regardless of income because Jasmine operated on a pay-what-to-can model, supplemented by the profits from her work at Thomas's flagship, where the walls were covered with photos of Big Mama Rose and the customers she'd served for 40 years, because Jasmine understood that success wasn't about escaping your origins, but honoring them, not about leaving your community behind but bringing opportunity back, not about individual achievement but collective elevation, and those values, learned in a soul food kitchen and refined through sacrifice, made her not just a talented chef but a transformative force in her industry and her neighborhood. The story of the celebrity chef who discovered extraordinary talent working overnight prep became somewhat famous in culinary circles, but those who knew the truth understood it backward. It wasn't Thomas who discovered Jasmine. It was Jasmine who revealed to Thomas what he'd lost and helped him find it again. It was a young woman who'd given up her dreams to honor her grandmother and support her family, who reminded a successful chef why those dreams mattered in the first place. It was someone working in obscurity with quiet excellence, who showed someone working in the spotlight that visibility without purpose was just noise, and in that mutual recognition, in that honest exchange, they'd both been transformed, both been educated in ways that went far beyond technique or business, both been reminded that the best cooking, the kind that really matters, comes from understanding that every meal is an opportunity to nourish someone, to connect with them, to honor the ingredients and the traditions and the people who taught you, and that responsibility transcends credentials and accolades and recognition. It's a covenant between cook and diner, between past and present, between individual skill and collective care. And Jasmine Walker, who'd learned to butcher meat with surgical precision in her grandmother's soul food kitchen, who'd sacrificed her own education to honor family and legacy, who'd maintained excellence in a windowless prepped kitchen at 3 a.m, because that's when it mattered most, embodied that covenant in every dish she created, and in teaching Thomas to see it again, in partnering with him to build something meaningful. She'd proven that the most important question in culinary arts isn't where you trained or who you trained under, but why you cook, what you cook for, who you serve through your cooking, and whether you bring your whole self, your full story, your deepest values to the work. Because that's what transforms cooking from technical execution into genuine artistry, from feeding bodies into nourishing souls, from job into calling. And that transformation, Jasmine believed, was Big Mama Rose's true legacy. The gift she'd given to her granddaughter, and through her to everyone who tasted food prepared with that level of intention, care, and love. The gift of understanding that excellence in cooking isn't about impressing people, but about serving them, and that service performed with integrity is its own reward, its own success, its own revolution against a world that too often mistakes visibility for value and credentials for character. And in choosing integrity over visibility, family over fame, purpose over prestige, Jasmine had demonstrated a kind of success that no culinary school could teach and no reality show could capture. The success of living according to your values, even when they cost you, especially then, because that's when they mean the most. And that lesson, carved into her character through years of impossible choices and quiet sacrifice, made her not just an extraordinary chef, but an extraordinary human. And those two things, as Big Mama Rose had always known, were inseparable. Because the best cooking comes from the best parts of ourselves, from our capacity for care and our commitment to excellence and our willingness to serve something larger than our own ambitions. And Jasmine Walker, working overnight prep at 3 in the morning with skills that could have taken her anywhere but a heart that kept her grounded in purpose, embodied all of that. And in being discovered by Thomas Laurent, she'd actually discovered him, reminded him of the chef he'd meant to be before success complicated everything. And together they'd built something that honored both their stories, both their teachers, both their understandings of what food could be when prepared and served with integrity. And that collaboration, born from a chance encounter in a quiet kitchen in the early morning hours, would influence countless other chefs and change how many people thought about credentials versus character, training versus tradition, and what it really meant to cook with soul.